In the dusty town of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, 1883, the wealthiest rancher for 3 counties was about to make a decision that would shock everyone. Silas Montgomery had everything a man could want: vast lands, cattle beyond counting, and a reputation that commanded respect. But he was growing old alone, untouched by the parade of socialites who sought his fortune. When the mail-order bride stepped off the train, the whole town held its breath. Clara Mae Donnelly arrived in a threadbare dress and worn shoes, looking more like a beggar than the refined lady the matchmaker had promised. The townsfolk whispered. His foreman shook his head in disgust. But Silas saw something they couldn't: a quiet strength, a gentle dignity, and scars that spoke of survival against impossible odds. Without hesitation, he offered her his name that very day. But what dark secret from Clara's past would threaten to destroy the love they were building? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montgomery ranch as Silas stood on his wraparound porch, surveying the empire his father had built and he had expanded. 50,000 acres of prime Montana grazing land stretched before him, dotted with red Angus cattle that represented the finest breeding stock west of the Mississippi. The main house, a sprawling 2-story structure of hewn logs and fieldstone, commanded the valley like a fortress of prosperity. Yet for all its grandeur, it felt as hollow as a church bell without its clapper. Silas fingered the silver spurs that had belonged to his father, their weight familiar in his calloused hands. Thomas Montgomery had worn these spurs through Indian raids, cattle drives, and the brutal winters that claimed lesser men. A Montgomery never backs down from what's right, his father had always said, and a Montgomery never leaves a promise unfulfilled. The irony wasn't lost on Silas that he'd broken that very promise by remaining unmarried at 43. The family name destined to die with him. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention. Jake Hartwell, his foreman for the past 15 years, rode up with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. Jake's weathered face bore the permanent squint of someone who'd spent decades reading the sky for weather signs and the horizon for trouble. "Boss, that telegram you've been waiting for came in." Jake dismounted and handed over the yellow paper, his expression carefully neutral. "Train's due at 3 o'clock. Silas unfolded the telegram with hands that had branded 10,000 cattle, but now trembled slightly. "Miss Donnelly arrives Tuesday. Refined young lady of good breeding. Perfect wife for gentleman rancher. Payment as agreed. Mrs. Hutchinson, matrimonial correspondent." "Still time to change your mind," Jake said quietly. "Plenty of good women right here in Silver Creek who'd be honored to carry the Montgomery name." Silas shook his head. "Those women see dollar signs. Not a man. They want what I've built, not who I am." He tucked the telegram into his vest pocket. "This way, at least I know what the transaction is." Jake spat into the dust. "Marriage ain't supposed to be a business deal, Silas." "Look around, Jake. Everything I touch turns to business deals. Why should marriage be different?" "But even as..." He said the words, Silas felt their bitter taste. He'd watched his parents' marriage, built on mutual respect that had deepened into profound love. His mother had died when he was 25, and his father had followed her to the grave within a year, unable to bear the separation. That kind of love seemed as foreign to Silas as speaking Chinese. The intervening hours passed with agonizing slowness. Silas found himself changing clothes 3 times, settling on his best black suit and the silver spurs his father had worn on his own wedding day. He'd oiled his dark hair and trimmed his mustache, feeling foolish as a schoolboy preparing for his first dance dot at 2:30. He hitched up his finest buggy, the one reserved for trips to the territorial capital. The leather seats gleamed, and the brass fittings caught the afternoon light. If he was going to collect a wife, He'd do it with dignity befitting the Montgomery name. Silver Creek's train station was little more than a wooden platform with a small office, but it served the growing community well enough. The town itself had sprung up around Silas's ranch, its prosperity tied to his success. Main Street boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, and the newly constructed schoolhouse that Silas had helped fund. Most of the buildings still showed the rawness of recent construction, but there was a sense of permanence settling over the place. A small crowd had gathered at the station, drawn by curiosity about their wealthiest neighbor's mail-order bride. Banker Cornelius Wade stood with his wife Prudence, their faces wearing expressions of barely concealed anticipation. Dr. Morrison chatted with the blacksmith, while several ranch wives clustered together, whispering behind their hands. "Heard she's from back east," Prudence Wade said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Cultured and refined. Just what Silver Creek needs a lady with proper breeding to set an example." Silas ignored the chatter, focusing instead on the distant sound of the approaching locomotive. The train rounded the bend, its whistle echoing off the surrounding hills, black smoke trailing behind like a funeral shroud. As it chugged to a stop with a great hiss of steam and squeal of brakes, Silas felt his heart hammering against his ribs. The conductor emerged first, followed by a traveling salesman with sample cases, then an elderly couple who were met by their son. Silas watched each passenger carefully, waiting for the refined young lady Mrs. Hutchinson had promised. A woman in an expensive traveling dress stepped down, and the crowd murmured appreciatively, but she was met by a well-dressed gentleman who clearly wasn't expecting a bride. Then, just as Silas began to wonder if there had been some mistake, a slight figure appeared in the doorway of the passenger car. The woman hesitated, clutching a small carpet bag that had seen better days. Her dress, once blue but now faded to the color of winter sky, had been mended so many times that the patches formed a careful pattern. Her shoes were hand-stitched leather, worn thin at the heels but polished to a shine that spoke of pride despite poverty. Clara Mae Donnelly stepped onto the platform with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to make every movement count. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple knot, revealing a face that was neither beautiful nor plain, but possessed of something more lasting character. Her eyes, green as spring grass, swept the crowd with a mixture of hope and wariness. That made Silas's chest tighten unexpectedly. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the townspeople absorbed the reality of Silas Montgomery's bride. This wasn't the cultured lady they'd expected, but a woman who looked like she'd stepped off a hardscrabble farm after a particularly difficult harvest. "Well, I never," Prudence Wade whispered, loud enough for half the platform to hear. "She looks like a field hand." Clara's cheeks flushed, but she kept her chin up, searching the crowd with those remarkable eyes. When her gaze found Silas, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. She knew she wasn't what he'd expected, just as he knew she was exactly what she appeared to be, a woman who'd known hardship but hadn't let it break her. Silas stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that surprised the onlookers. "Miss Donnelly, I presume." "I'm Silas Montgomery." Clara's voice, when she found it, was soft but steady. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm grateful for your invitation, though I fear there may have been some misunderstanding about my circumstances." Her honesty cut through the pretense like a sharp blade. Here was a woman who wouldn't lie to spare his feelings or her own. "No misunderstanding, Miss Donnelly. You're here, and that's what matters." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her hand was small but calloused, speaking of hard work and harder choices. As they walked toward his buggy, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, whispers following in their wake. "Help you with your luggage?" Silas asked, noting she carried only the one small bag. "This is all I have," Clara said simply. Without shame or explanation. Jake Hartwell had been watching from beside the buggy, his face unreadable. As they approached, he tipped his hat politely, but said nothing. Silas helped Clara into the buggy. Noting how she arranged her threadbare skirts with unconscious dignity, the ride to the ranch passed in comfortable silence, broken only by Clara's quiet observations about the landscape. She noticed things, the way the evening light painted the mountains, the quality of the grass, the condition of the fences. These weren't the comments of a city woman unfamiliar with rural life, but of someone who understood the land and its demands. "It's beautiful," she said as they crested the hill that gave the first full view of the Montgomery ranch. "You must be very proud." Silas found himself seeing his home through her eyes, the careful planning that had gone into its placement, the way it nestled into the landscape rather than dominating it. "My father chose this spot. Said a man's home should be part of the land, not just sitting on top of it. He was a wise man." He was. Silas glanced at her profile, noting the way. She studied everything with those intelligent eyes. "You've lived on a ranch before." It wasn't a question, and Clara didn't treat it as one. "My family had a small farm in Kansas. We lost it to drought and debt when I was 16. The simple statement carried years of struggle and loss. Silas felt something shift inside him, a recognition of shared understanding. They'd both known the weight of responsibility, the burden of trying to hold on to something precious in a world that seemed determined to take it away. As they pulled up to the main house, several ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse and barn, curious about their boss's new wife. Silas saw them take in Clara's appearance with expressions ranging from surprise to disappointment. He helped her down from the buggy, his jaw tightening at their obvious judgments. "This is Mrs. Montgomery," he announced, the words carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "She's to be treated with the respect due my wife." Clara's eyes widened slightly at the title. They hadn't yet discussed the timing of their marriage, but she said nothing. The ranch hands nodded respectfully, but Silas could see the questions in their faces. The main house felt different with Clara in it, less cavernous somehow. She moved through the rooms with quiet appreciation, her fingers trailing over the handcrafted furniture and careful stonework. In the kitchen, she paused, taking in the modern conveniences with genuine wonder. "I've never seen a stove like this," she admitted, running her hand along the cast iron surface. "It came from Chicago. Cost more than most folks make in a year, but it was worth it." He paused, then added, "Do you cook?" "I do, though I'm used to simpler fare than you might prefer." "I'm not hard to please, Miss Donnelly. A man gets tired of eating his own cooking after a while." They stood in the kitchen as the evening light faded, two strangers trying to find their footing in an impossible situation. Clara broke the silence first. "Mr. Montgomery, I think we should speak plainly about our circumstances. You paid for a wife, and I need the security of marriage. But I won't pretend to be something I'm not, and I won't live a lie." Her directness was refreshing after years of dealing with people who measured every word for advantage. "What do you propose?" "We marry as agreed, but we take time to know each other. I'll earn my place here through my actions, not my appearance. And if, in time, we find we suit each other well enough, perhaps we can build something real." Silas studied her face, noting the steady resolve in her eyes. Here was a woman who'd thought this through, who understood the stakes without flinching from them. "And if we don't suit, then we'll deal with that when it comes. But I believe in giving honest effort its due." He extended his hand, and she shook it firmly. "Partners, then, until we know better." "Partners," she agreed, that night as Clara settled into the guest room that would be hers until they determined the shape of their marriage. Silas sat on his front porch with a glass of whiskey and his father's silver spurs. The night was clear, filled with the sounds of cattle lowing and coyotes calling across the range. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel quite so empty. Perhaps Jake was right that marriage shouldn't be a business deal. But as he thought about Clara's honest eyes and steady handshake, Silas began to wonder if this particular transaction might lead to something neither of them had dared to expect. The church social arrived with all the subtlety of a summer thunderstorm, and Clara felt just as prepared for it. 3 days had passed since her arrival at the Montgomery ranch, 3 days of careful politeness and tentative conversations over meals that tasted like ambrosia compared to the meager fare she'd grown accustomed to. She'd spent those days learning the rhythms of ranch life, mending clothes that had been neglected too long, and trying to find her place in a world that felt as foreign as the moon dot now. As she stood before the mirror in her guest room, Clara fingered the thin gold band that had belonged to her mother, the only thing of value she'd managed to keep through all the lean years. She'd hidden it in her shoe during the journey west, wrapped in a scrap of cloth that still held the faint scent of her mother's lavender soap. The ring was too precious to wear openly. It carried too many memories, too much hope for the kind of love she'd thought she'd never find. Ready? Silas appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. The black suit emphasized his broad shoulders and the natural authority he carried like a second skin. He'd been nothing but kind to her these past days, treating her with a courtesy that bordered on reverence, as if she were made of spun glass rather than Kansas farm stock. Clara smoothed her best dress, a same faded blue she'd worn on the train, but now clean and pressed with careful attention to every wrinkle. She'd spent an hour the night before trying to fashion her hair into something approaching fashionable, finally settling on a simple style that wouldn't fall apart at the first gust of wind. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said, though her stomach churned like butter in a churn. The social was being held at the newly completed community hall, a building that stood as testament to Silver Creek's growing prosperity. Wagons and buggies lined the street, and the sound of voices and fiddle music drifted through the evening air. Clara could see well-dressed women through the windows, their silk gowns and elaborate hairstyles making her feel like a sparrow among peacocks. Silas helped her down from the buggy with his usual careful courtesy, but she could feel the tension in his grip. He was as nervous as she was, though he hid it better. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're a Montgomery now. That means something in this town." But as they entered the hall, Clara discovered that being a Montgomery meant different things to different people. The men greeted Silas with the deference due to the most powerful rancher in 3 counties, but their eyes lingered on Clara with expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly concealed disdain. The women were worse, their smiles sharp as winter wind, their voices honey-sweet with poison underneath. "Silas, darling." Vivian Ashford swept toward them like a ship under full sail, her emerald silk dress rustling with each step. She was everything Clara wasn't: tall, elegant, with golden hair piled high and jewelry that caught the lamplight like captured stars. "We've all been simply dying to meet your bride." The pause before the word bride was slight but unmistakable, and Clara felt it like a slap. Vivian's pale blue eyes took in every detail of Clara's appearance: the mended dress, the simple hairstyle, the calloused hands that spoke of hard work rather than leisured refinement. "Mrs. Ashford," Silas said formally, "may I present my wife, Clara Montgomery." The word wife hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Clara saw the shock ripple through the nearby conversations, followed by the kind of whispers that carried like wind through dry grass. They hadn't planned to announce their marriage so soon, but Silas had claimed her publicly with a finality that left no room for doubt. "How?" "Charming," Vivian managed, extending one gloved hand as if she were bestowing a great favor. "I do hope you'll feel at home here, though I imagine it's quite different from whatever little farm you came from." Clara took the offered hand, briefly noting how Vivian's grip was limp and cool, unlike the firm handshakes she was used to. "It's very different," she agreed calmly. "But beauty takes many forms, doesn't it? I find this valley quite remarkable." Oh, yes, the view is lovely. Vivian's smile sharpened. Though I suppose it takes a certain refinement to truly appreciate such things. We've worked so hard to bring culture to this frontier town. Perhaps you'd like to join Our Ladies Auxiliary? We're planning a charity drive for the unfortunate. A condescension was wrapped in silk, but it hit like a fist. Clara felt the blood rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. Around them, other conversations had stilled as the women of Silver Creek society gathered like vultures sensing weakness. "How generous of you," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. "Though I've found that true charity often comes from those who've known want themselves, rather than those who've simply observed it from a distance." Vivian's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Prudence Wade joined their circle, her round face flushed with excitement at the unfolding drama. "My dear, you simply must tell us about your family," Prudence gushed, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer would be disappointing. "Are they from good society? I'm sure we'd all love to hear about your background." Clara felt the circle closing around her, these elegant predators sensing blood in the water. She could feel Silas tense beside her, could practically hear him weighing whether to intervene or let her fight her own battles. The decision was taken from both of them when young Eleanor Ashford, Vivian's daughter, spoke up from behind her, mother's skirts. "Mama, why does the lady look so poor? Did she lose all her pretty dresses?" The innocent cruelty of childhood cut deeper than any adult malice could have. A silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of fiddle music and men's laughter from across the room. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, all the careful composure she'd built over 3 days crumbling like a dam under floodwaters. "Eleanor!" Vivian scolded, but her voice carried satisfaction rather than genuine rebuke. "You mustn't say such things, even when they single quotes obvious." That was the final straw. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes, not tears of shame, but of rage at these women who thought fine clothes gave them the right to judge a person's worth. She thought of her mother, who died wearing a patched dress, but with more dignity in her little finger than this entire room possessed. She thought of the ring hidden in her shoe, symbol of a love that had flourished despite poverty. And suddenly she couldn't bear another moment of their cruel entertainment. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Without waiting for a response, she turned and fled, pushing through the crowd toward the door. The night air hit her like a blessing, cool and clean after the stifling atmosphere inside. She made it to the corner of the building before the tears came, great, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. All the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks, all the desperate hope that maybe this time things would be different, came pouring out in the darkness. She was so lost in her grief that she didn't hear the footsteps until a warm coat settled around her shoulders. Silas stood beside her, his face grave in the moonlight, but his presence oddly comforting rather than intrusive. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I know I embarrassed you in there. I know this isn't what you bargained for. Clara." His voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She raised her tear-stained face, expecting to see disappointment or anger. Instead, she found something that looked almost like pride. "Those women in there," he said carefully, "they've never worked a day in their lives. They've never gone to bed hungry or worried about keeping a roof over their heads. They judge you because they're afraid that someone with real strength might show them how shallow their pretty lives really are." "But they're right," Clara whispered. "I am poor. I do come from nothing. I can't give you the kind of wife who would enhance your standing." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the stars scattered across the Montana sky. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her pay attention. "My mother came from nothing too," he said finally. "Her family were farmers in Nebraska who lost everything to grasshoppers and bad weather. When my father married her, folks said he was throwing his life away on a woman who couldn't even read." Clara's breath caught. "But Mrs. Hutchinson said you wanted a refined lady." "Mrs. Hutchinson said what she thought I wanted to hear. But refined doesn't mean what those women think it means." He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes serious. "You've been here 3 days, Clara. In those 3 days, you've mended clothes that have been sitting in a basket for months. You've organized my kitchen in a way that makes sense. You've noticed which cattle are favoring their left legs and suggested we check for stone bruises. You've done all this without being asked, without expecting praise, because it needed doing." His words washed over her like water on drought-cracked earth. "Silas, I'm not finished." His voice held a quiet authority that stopped her protest. "Yesterday, I watched you spend 20 minutes coaxing that barn cat to let you treat the cut on her paw. The hands have been trying to catch that cat for weeks, but she came to you because she sensed your kindness." Clara felt something shift. Inside her chest, a loosening of the tight band of shame that had been choking her since childhood. "Those women in there," Silas continued, gesturing toward the hall, "they think refinement comes from having the right dress or the right accent. But real refinement, the kind that matters, comes from how you treat people when nobody's watching. It comes from dignity in the face of hardship, from kindness when you've got every reason to be bitter." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band, elegant in its lack of ornamentation. "This was my mother's wedding ring," he said quietly. "She wore it for 30 years, through good times and bad, through seasons when we had plenty and seasons when we had to count every penny. My father gave it to her the day they married, and she never took it off until the day she died." Clara's hand went instinctively to her shoe, where her own mother's ring lay hidden. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. "I'd like you to wear it," Silas said, "not because I bought you, or because we have some business arrangement, but because I think she would have liked you. I think she would have seen in you what I'm beginning to see, a woman of real substance, real worth." The tears came again, but they were different now, cleaner somehow, washing away the accumulated hurt of years rather than adding to it. "Silas, we barely know each other." "No," he agreed, "we don't, but I know enough. I know you're honest when it would be easier to lie. I know you're brave when it would be safer to hide. And I know those women in there don't deserve to breathe the same air as you, let alone judge your worth." Clara looked down at the ring, gleaming softly in the moonlight. Such a simple thing, but it represented everything she'd dreamed of, and thought she'd never find acceptance, respect, the possibility of love freely given rather than grudgingly earned. "There's something you should know," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "About my past, about why I really answered your advertisement." Silas waited, patient as the mountains themselves. "I'm not just poor, Silas. There are ... complications. Things that might follow me here, that might put you in danger just by association." His expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, not fear, but a sharpening of attention, like a man seeing. Storm clouds on the horizon. "What kind of complications?" Clara took a shaky breath, her hand going again to her shoe where her mother's ring waited. "The kind that come with blood on them." Before Silas could respond, the door to the hall opened and Jake Hartwell emerged, his weathered face tight with concern. "Boss, sorry to interrupt, but we've got problems. Word just came in that someone's been asking questions about the new Mrs. down at the telegraph office. Stranger came through this afternoon, showing around what looked like a photograph." The blood drained from Clara's face. She'd known this day would come, had hoped against hope that her trail had gone cold, but she'd always known. The past had found her, just as she'd begun to believe she might finally have a future. Clara? Silas's voice was steady, but she could hear the underlying steel. What exactly are we dealing with? She looked up at him, this man who'd offered her his mother's ring and defended her honor against a room full of vipers. The least she could do was tell him the truth, even if it cost her everything. My name isn't Clara Mae Donnelly, she said quietly. It's Clara Mae Fitzgerald. And there are men who want me dead for what I witnessed back in Kansas. The words hung in the night air like smoke from a gunshot, changing everything and nothing all at once. Silas studied her face for a long moment, then closed the ring box with a decisive snap and slipped it back into his pocket. Well then, he said calmly, as if she'd just told him it might rain tomorrow, I suppose we'd better get married tonight. The wedding took place by lamplight in Reverend Morrison's parlor, witnessed by Jake Hartwell and the Reverend's wife Martha, who'd been roused from her evening reading with barely enough time to pin up her graying hair. Clara stood beside Silas, in her mended blue dress, her hands trembling as she repeated the vows that would bind her fate to his. The simple gold band slipped onto her finger as if it had always belonged there, warm from Silas's pocket and heavy with the weight of promises, both spoken and unspoken. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Morrison intoned, his kind eyes reflecting the solemnity of the moment despite its hasty nature. Silas's kiss was gentle, respectful, a seal on their compact, rather than a declaration of passion. But Clara felt something shift between them in that brief contact, a recognition that they'd crossed a threshold from which there could be no retreat. The ride back to the ranch passed in contemplative silence, both of them lost in thoughts too complex for easy words. Clara touched her mother's ring through her shoe, drawing comfort from its familiar presence, while above her, the wedding band caught the moonlight with each movement of her hands. Two symbols of love, separated by a generation, but united in their testament to the possibility of happiness amid hardship. The hands will be curious, Silas said as they approached the main house, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. News travels fast in a small community. What will you tell them? The truth, that I married a woman of courage and character, and any man who can't see that is welcome to find employment elsewhere. Clara felt a flutter of panic at the thought of causing discord among the ranch workers. Silas, I don't want to be the reason for trouble. These men depend on you for their livelihood, and they depend on me to make good decisions. Marrying you is a good decision, Clara. He pulled the buggy to a stop in front of the house. The ones who matter will see that in time. But the next morning brought Clara face to face with the reality of her new position. As she descended to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, a task she'd taken on naturally during her brief stay, she found Maria Santos, the housekeeper who came twice weekly, standing frozen by the stove with a coffee pot in her hands. Senora Montgomery, Maria stammered, clearly unsure of protocol. I did not know you would be cooking. Should I? Clara saw the confusion in the older woman's eyes, the uncertainty about how to treat a mistress who worked with her hands. Please, Maria, call me Clara, and I'd welcome your help with breakfast. I'm still learning my way around this beautiful kitchen. Maria's weathered face relaxed slightly. She'd been housekeeper to the Montgomery family for 8 years, since her husband died in a mining accident, and she knew the rhythms of the ranch better than anyone. Send her Silas. He likes his eggs over easy and his bacon crisp. The coffee. He takes it black and strong enough to wake the dead. Working together, they prepared a meal that filled the kitchen with the comfortable sounds of domesticity. Clara found herself appreciating Maria's quiet efficiency, the way she moved through tasks with practiced ease. Here was a woman who understood the dignity of honest work, who took pride in doing things well, regardless of their nature. When Silas appeared for breakfast, Clara noticed him taking in the scene, his new wife working alongside his housekeeper, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She served his plate herself, noting his slight smile as she remembered the details Maria had shared about his preferences. "The hands are gathering for the morning briefing," he said, cutting into his eggs with obvious satisfaction. "Would you like to meet them properly? I know yesterday was ... abbreviated." Clara's stomach tightened at the memory of her flight from the social, but she nodded. "I think that would be wise." The morning briefing took place in the barn, where the ranch hands gathered to receive their assignments for the day. As Clara and Silas approached, she could see the men stealing glances at her, their faces carefully neutral, but their curiosity obvious. These were hard men who worked demanding jobs in unforgiving country, and she wondered what they made of. Their boss's hasty marriage to a woman who looked like she'd stepped off a hardscrabble farm. "Boys," Silas said without preamble, "I'd like you to meet my wife, Clara Montgomery. We were married last night." A ripple of surprise went through the group, followed by the kind of silence that spoke of men reassessing a situation they thought. They understood. Jake Hartwell stepped forward, removing his hat with old-fashioned courtesy. "Ma'am, it's an honor to meet you properly. I'm Jake Hartwell, foreman of this outfit." Clara shook his hand firmly, grateful for his steady demeanor. "Mr. Hartwell, Silas speaks very highly of you." One by one, the other hands introduced themselves. Tom Bradley, the head wrangler. Young Pete Collins, barely 18 and eager to prove himself. Miguel Santos, Maria's nephew and the best rider on the ranch. And several others whose names Clara filed away carefully. She made a point of meeting each man's eyes, of treating him as an individual worthy of respect, rather than simply part of the ranch machinery. "Mrs. Montgomery," Tom Bradley said hesitantly, "begging your pardon, but we heard there might be some trouble headed our way. Anything we should know about?" Clara felt all eyes on her. These men who'd sworn loyalty to Silas, now wondering if she'd brought danger to their doorstep. She could have deflected, could have left Silas to handle the explanation, but something in their direct gazes demanded honesty. "There might be," she said simply. "I witnessed something back in Kansas that certain people would prefer stayed hidden. If trouble comes, it'll be looking for me, not for any of you." "With respect, ma'am," Pete Collins spoke up, his young voice carrying more authority than his years suggested. "Anybody who comes looking for trouble on Montgomery land is going to find more than they bargained for." A murmur of agreement went through the group, and Clara felt something warm unfurl in her chest. These men barely knew her, had no reason to offer their protection beyond loyalty to Silas, yet they stood ready to defend her, simply because she was one of them now. "I appreciate that more than I can say," Clara replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But I won't ask any of you to risk yourselves for my sake." "Ma'am," Jake said quietly, "you didn't ask. We're offering." After the briefing, Clara found herself with time to explore the ranch properly. She'd seen glimpses during her brief stay, but now she walked the grounds with the eyes of someone who belonged here, someone whose future was tied to the land's prosperity. The barn was a masterpiece of practical construction, its hand-hewn beams and careful joinery speaking of craftsmanship that would last generations. The horses in their stalls were magnificent creatures, bred for strength and endurance rather than merely appearance. Clara paused at each stall, noting which animals seemed restless or favoring a particular leg, filing away observations that might prove useful later. In the corral, she watched Miguel Santos work with a young gelding, his movements fluid and patient as he earned the animal's trust. The horse was clearly spirited, dancing and snorting at the end of the lead rope. But Miguel never hurried, never forced the issue. "He's beautiful," Clara said, approaching the fence. Miguel glanced over, his dark eyes assessing her with the same careful attention he gave to horses. "See, but he thinks he knows better than I do. My tia Maria, she says you have worked with horses before?" "Some. My family had a few work horses, nothing as fine as this." "Would you like to try?" Miguel held out the lead rope, a test disguised as an offer. Clara considered the animal young, strong, probably not fully broken to saddle yet. She could see the challenge in Miguel's eyes, could sense him measuring her courage against her appearance. Slowly, she climbed through the fence rails and approached the horse, moving with the deliberate calm that came from years of handling unpredictable animals. The gelding snorted and sidled away, but Clara didn't pursue. Instead, she stood quietly, letting him take her measure as she took his. When he finally approached, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent, she allowed him to investigate before slowly extending her hand. "Ah," Miguel said quietly, "you understand. Many people, they think they must dominate the horse immediately. But the best partnerships, they begin with respect." Clara spent the better part of an hour in the corral, gaining the young horses, trust through patience rather than force. By the time she handed the lead rope back to Miguel, she'd earned something more valuable than his approval. She'd earned his respect. Word of her session with the horse spread through the ranch with the speed that news travels in close communities. By evening, Clara noticed a subtle shift in how the hands treated her. She was no longer simply the boss's new wife, but a woman who understood their world, who could handle herself around livestock and wasn't afraid of honest work. That evening, as she prepared dinner in the big kitchen, Clara found herself humming something she hadn't done in months. The simple white apron she'd fashioned from unused fabric made her feel more like herself than any fine dress ever could. When Silas entered, drawn by the sense of pot roast and fresh bread, she turned to greet him with flour on her hands, genuine contentment in her eyes. "You look happy," he observed, settling into a chair where he could watch her work. "I am, I think, for the first time in a very long while." Clara wiped her hands on the apron, suddenly shy. "Your men. They're good people. They're your men now, too. And they know quality when they see it, even if some folks in town don't." Clara felt a shadow cross her heart at the reminder of the previous evening's humiliation. "About last night? At the social? What about it? I embarrassed you. I know how important your standing is in the community." Silas rose and crossed to where she stood, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. "Clara, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, seeing kindness there that still surprised her after a lifetime of expecting disappointment. "Those women tried to tear you down because they recognize something they don't possess genuine worth. You didn't embarrass me. You showed me what real grace looks like under pressure, but your reputation will be just fine. The people whose opinions matter to me saw how you handled yourself. The rest can think what they like." As they sat down to dinner, Clara reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been Clara Mae Fitzgerald, a woman running from her past, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope for sanctuary. Now she was Clara Montgomery, wife to a man of substance, mistress of a ranch that represented everything she'd ever dreamed of having. But as she touched her mother's ring through the fabric of her skirt, Clara knew that her past wouldn't remain buried forever. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were looking for Clara Mae Fitzgerald, and when they found her, all the acceptance and belonging in the world might not be enough to protect the new life she was building. Still, for tonight, in the warmth of the kitchen with her husband across from her, and the sounds of the ranch settling into evening quiet around them, Clara allowed herself to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, dreams could take root even in the most unlikely soil. The leather journal lay open on Silas's desk, its pages filled with the careful script he'd maintained for 15 years. Every evening after the ranch work was done, he recorded the day's events, cattle counts, weather patterns, market prices, and the 1,000 small details that determine success or failure in ranching. But tonight, his pen hesitated over the blank page as he struggled to find words for thoughts that seemed to shift like shadows. May 15th, 1883. Married Clara Mae Donnelly. This evening, she is not what I expected, but perhaps that is for the best. There is strength in her that runs deeper than the socialites of Silver Creek could fathom. She worked alongside Maria today as if born to it, and Miguel reports she has a natural way with horses. I find myself wondering what other surprises she carries, and whether I am foolish to hope that this arrangement might become something more. He paused, ink pooling at the tip of his pen. How could he explain the way she'd looked in his kitchen that morning, flour dusting her hands and contentment lighting her eyes? How could he capture the moment when she'd faced down his ranch hands with nothing but honesty and quiet dignity? There are complications ahead. Jake reports strangers asking questions, and Clara herself admits to a dangerous past. Yet I find I am not afraid for myself, only for her. Strange how quickly a man's priorities can shift when he finds something worth protecting. A soft knock interrupted his writing. "Come in." Clara appeared in the doorway, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders and her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She wore a simple white nightgown that had seen better days, but was clean and mended with careful stitches. The sight of her in his private sanctuary, this room where he'd spent so many solitary evenings, made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said quietly. "I saw the light under your door and thought ... Well, I thought perhaps we should talk." Silas closed the journal and gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "Please sit. Would you like some coffee?" "I was about to make a pot. That would be nice, thank you." As he prepared the coffee, Clara studied the room that revealed so much about the man she'd married. The walls were lined with books, not the leather-bound volumes chosen for show that filled many wealthy homes, but well-worn texts on animal husbandry, land management, and history. A rifle hung above the fireplace, flanked by photographs of people she didn't recognize, but assumed were family. The desk itself was solid oak, scarred by years of use, but cared for with obvious pride. "Your parents?" she asked, nodding toward a formal portrait on the mantelpiece. "Yes, taken shortly after they were married." Silas handed her a cup of coffee and settled into his chair. They were devoted to each other. "I sometimes wondered if I'd ever find that kind of partnership." Clara studied the photograph, noting the way the young couple stood close together, their faces serious, but their eyes holding warmth. The woman bore a resemblance to Silas, with the same dark hair and steady gaze, while the man possessed the kind of weathered strength that spoke of a life lived outdoors. "They look happy," she said softly. "Really happy, not just posed for the camera." They were. Even after 25 years of marriage, my father would still bring my mother wildflowers he found while checking the herds. Sighed, it reminded him of their first spring together. The story touched something deep in Clara's chest, a longing for the kind of love that endured through seasons and years. What happened to them? Influenza, the winter I turned 26. First mother, then father 3 weeks later. Dr. Morrison said father just ... gave up. Couldn't bear the thought of living without her. Clara set down her coffee cup, her heart aching for the young man Silas had been, left alone to manage an empire while grieving parents who'd clearly been the center of his world. "I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating." It was. But it also taught me something about love, that the real thing is worth any price, even the pain of losing it. His dark eyes met hers across the desk. I'd given up thinking I might find it for myself. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze, awareness crackling like electricity in the quiet room. "Silas," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the questions that had been building since their hasty wedding. "About this marriage, about what you expect. I expect nothing you're not ready to give," he said quietly. "We agreed to be partners until we know better." "That stands, Clara. I won't pressure you for more than you're willing to offer." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by something that might have been disappointment. "Thank you. It's just, my experience with men hasn't been particularly encouraging." Something dark flickered in Silas's eyes. "Did someone hurt you?" The protective edge in his voice surprised her. "Not in the way you mean, but I learned early that men usually want something in return for their kindness, and they're rarely patient when it comes to collecting. I'm not most men, Clara." "No," she agreed, studying his face in the lamplight. "You're not. That's what makes this so complicated." They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts too complex for easy expression. Outside, the night sounds of the ranch provided a peaceful backdrop, cattle lowing softly, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, the distant call of a coyote to its mate. "Tell me about Kansas," Silas said eventually. "Not the dangerous parts, if you're not ready, but the rest. Your family, your life before." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing warmth from the ceramic as memories rose unbidden. "We had a small farm outside Topeka. Nothing grand, but it was ours. My father raised wheat mostly, some corn. My mother kept chickens, and a vegetable garden that was the envy of the county." Her voice took on a dreamy quality as she spoke of summer evenings on the front porch, of helping her mother preserve peaches, and learning to braid her father's wheat into decorative patterns for the church harvest festival. "You miss it," Silas observed. "I miss what it was before everything went wrong, before the drought and the debt and the ... She stopped, the memories turning dark. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready. Part of me wants to. I've been carrying it alone for so long." Clara looked up at him, seeing patience in his eyes rather than the curiosity that usually drove people's questions. "My parents died when I was 18. The farm was already failing, 3 years of bad crops, mounting debts. I tried to hold on to it, worked every job I could find in town, but sometimes trying isn't enough, no matter how hard you work." "Exactly. I lost the farm, lost everything except what I could carry. Spent the next few years moving from town to town, taking whatever work I could find, seamstress, kitchen help, cleaning houses for ladies who looked at me like I might steal their silver." Silas's jaw tightened at the image of Clara being treated with such disdain, but he said nothing, letting her find her own pace. "Then, last winter, I found work in a boarding house in Wichita. That's where ... She stopped, her face going pale. "Where the trouble started." Clara nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "I saw something I shouldn't have seen. Did something that put me in danger from men who don't leave witnesses. And that's why you answered my advertisement. I needed to disappear, to become someone else entirely. Clara Mae Fitzgerald was in danger, but Clara Mae Donnelly might be safe, or so I hoped." Silas leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Whatever you did, Clara, whatever you witnessed, you're not facing it alone anymore. This ranch, these people, we protect our own." Tears gathered in Clara's eyes at the simple declaration. When had anyone last offered to stand between her and danger? When had anyone claimed her as family worth defending? "You don't understand what you're offering. These men, they're not ordinary criminals. They have money, influence, connections that reach far beyond Kansas. And I have a ranch full of men who faced down rustlers, claim jumpers, and winter storms that would break most people. We've dealt with our share of men who thought money made them untouchable." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the safety he offered, but years of running had taught her that danger always found a way. Still, sitting in his study with the warmth of his presence surrounding her, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where the past couldn't reach her. "There's something else," she said suddenly, reaching down to her bare foot. Her fingers found the small bundle hidden in her shoe, carefully extracting her mother's ring. "I have this." Silas watched as she unwrapped the thin gold band, noting the reverent way she handled it. "Your mother's?" "The only thing I managed to keep through all the moves, all the losses. She wore it for 22 years, through good times and desperate ones. My father gave it to her with a promise that no matter what came, they'd face it together." She held the ring up to the lamplight, and Silas could see the delicate engraving worn smooth by decades of wear. They kept that promise, even when keeping it meant staying on a failing farm, even when it meant dying poor. This ring represents the kind of love I thought existed only in stories. And now? Clara's eyes met his, vulnerable and hopeful at the same time. "Now I'm married to a man who gave me his mother's ring and defended me against a room full of socialites. A man who sees worth in someone the world considers worthless." She paused, then added quietly, "I'm beginning to think maybe the stories aren't just stories after all." Silas rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her so their eyes were level. "May I?" Clara nodded, and he took her mother's ring with the same reverence she'd shown it. For a moment, he simply held it, understanding the weight of trust she'd placed in him by sharing this most precious possession. "Clara," he said softly, "I don't know what the future holds for us. I can't promise we won't face danger, or that this arrangement will turn into the kind of love our parents knew. But I can promise you this, as long as I draw breath, you'll have a home here. You'll have someone who stands with you, not behind you or in front of you, but beside you." He slipped her mother's ring onto her right hand, alongside his mother's, wedding band on her left. "2 generations of love," he said quietly. "Maybe that's enough to build on." Clara looked down at her hands, adorned now with symbols of hope from both their families, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of love, the foundation upon which it might grow. "Yes," she whispered, "I think it might be." Later, as Clara prepared for bed in her guest room, she found herself touching both rings in turn, drawing strength from their presence. Through the window, she could see the lights in the bunkhouse, where the ranch hands were settling in for the night, and beyond that, the vast expanse of Montana sky, dotted with more stars than she'd ever imagined existed. For the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to dream not of escape or survival, but of belonging. Of mornings spent working alongside Maria in the kitchen, of afternoons in the corral, earning the trust of spirited horses, of evenings in the study sharing stories in silence, with a man who saw her worth even when she struggled to see it herself. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, and she knew her past would eventually catch up with her. But tonight, wearing 2 golden circles that connected her to love stories spanning generations, Clara Mae Montgomery fell asleep feeling something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late May, delivered by a nervous-looking postal worker who seemed eager to complete his business and depart. Clara was in the garden behind the house, coaxing life from the plot of earth that had been, neglected since Silas's mother died, when Maria called to her from the kitchen door, "Senora Clara, there is mail for you." Clara straightened, wiping dirt from her hands on the apron she'd grown to treasure. In the 3 weeks since her marriage, she'd received no correspondence from anyone, partly because few people knew where she was, and partly because most of the people from her past were better left undisturbed. The sight of her name written in an unfamiliar hand on the envelope made her stomach clench with familiar dread. She tore it open with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the brief message once, then again, as the color drained from her face. "CMF. They know where you are. The trial date is set for July 15th. You must testify or they will walk free. Someone is coming to bring you back. Trust no one you don't know personally. JM." The letter fluttered from Clara's nerveless fingers, and Maria was beside her instantly. Her weathered face creased with concern. "Senora, what is wrong? You look like you have seen a ghost." "I need to speak with Silas," Clara managed, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "Is he still in the south pasture?" "See, but Clara, perhaps you should sit down first. You are very pale." But Clara was already moving, her legs carrying her toward the barn with mechanical precision, while her mind reeled with the implications of the message. J.M. could only be Judge Marcus, the federal judge who'd been trying to build a case against the Kellerman gang for 3 years. She'd hoped her disappearance would force him to find other witnesses, other evidence. Instead, it seemed her testimony remained crucial to his case. She found Silas examining a fence line with Tom Bradley and Pete Collins, the 3 men deep in discussion about replacing posts damaged by the harsh winter. At the sight of her approaching figure, Silas immediately broke away from the conversation, his practiced eye reading the distress written across her features. "Clara, what's happened?" She handed him the crumpled letter without a word, watching his face darken as he read. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket. "Tom, Pete, finish up here and head back to the barn. I'll catch up with you later." The 2 hands exchanged glances, but obeyed without question, recognizing the tone of a man accustomed to immediate compliance. Once they were alone, Silas turned his full attention to Clara, noting the way she hugged her arms around herself as if trying to hold the pieces together. "Tell me about the trial," he said quietly. Clara sank onto a nearby boulder, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "Last February, I was working late in the kitchen of the boarding house, cleaning up after the evening meal. I heard voices in the alley behind the building men arguing about money, about territory. I thought it was just drunks from the saloon, so I went to the window to see if I should fetch the sheriff." Her voice grew smaller as she continued. "Instead, I saw Nathan Kellerman and 2 of his men beating a federal marshal who'd been investigating their operation. They They killed him, Silas. Shot him twice in the chest and left him to die in that dirty alley like he was nothing." Silas felt a cold rage building in his chest, not at Clara, but at the situation that had forced her to carry such a burden alone. "And they saw you?" One of them looked up just as I was backing away from the window. Our eyes met for maybe 3 seconds, but it was enough. He pointed at the window and shouted something to the others. I ran. "That's when you left Wichita?" Clara nodded, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "I knew what happened to people who crossed the Kellermans. I packed what I could carry and was on the first train out of town. I hoped that if I disappeared completely, the case would fall apart and they'd find other things to occupy their attention. But federal judges don't give up that easily. Apparently not. Judge Marcus has been sending messages through underground networks, trying to find me. That letter means he succeeded." Clara looked up at Silas, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "They're coming for me, Silas. And when they find me, they'll drag me back to testify in a trial that could get me killed." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, while his mind worked through the implications. Finally, he sat beside her on the boulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "How dangerous are these Kellerman men?" "Nathan Kellerman controls most of the illegal liquor trade between Kansas and Missouri. His brother Marcus handles enforcement. He's killed at least 6 people that I know of, maybe more. They have money, political connections, and absolutely no conscience about eliminating threats. And your testimony is crucial to the case?" Clara's laugh held no humor. "I'm the only witness who saw Nathan Kellerman commit murder. Without me, they'll walk free and continue terrorizing anyone who gets in their way." Silas absorbed this information. With the same methodical approach he applied to ranch problems, identifying the threat, assessing available resources, formulating a plan. "When did you say the trial is scheduled?" "July 15th. Less than 2 months. And this Judge Marcus, you trust him?" "As much as I trust anyone in this situation. He's been fighting corruption in Kansas for years, Made himself a lot of enemies doing it. But he's honest, which is more than I can say for most officials in that part of the country. Silas stood and began pacing, his mind already working through possibilities. If you testify and help convict the Kellermans, will that end the threat to you? Maybe. Or it might make me a target for revenge. Their organization is bigger than just the two brothers. And if you don't testify? Clara's shoulders sagged. They go free, and Judge Marcus's case falls apart. But the Kellermans will still want me dead, because I know too much. My only options are to testify and hope for protection afterward, or spend the rest of my life running. The weight of impossible choices settled between them like a physical presence. Silas continued his pacing, his boots wearing a path in the dusty ground, while Clara watched with growing despair. She'd known this day would come, had tried to prepare herself for it, but the reality felt crushing. There might be another way, Silas said suddenly, stopping directly in front of her. What do you mean? Judge Marcus wants your testimony to convict the Kellermans, but he needs you alive and safe to give it. What if we offered him a bargain? Clara felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed by caution. What kind of bargain? You testify, but on our terms. Here, in Montana Territory, under the protection of federal marshals. Make them come to us instead of you going back into their territory. Is that even possible? Federal judges have broad authority in cases involving interstate crime. If Marcus is as committed to justice as you say, he might be willing to arrange for testimony to be taken by deposition, especially if the alternative is losing his star witness to intimidation or worse. Clara stared at him, hardly daring to believe. You'd do that? You'd turn your ranch into a target just to help me avoid going back to Kansas? Clara. Silas knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his larger ones. Look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, seeing determination there that both thrilled and terrified her. This ranch has weathered Indian raids, claim jumpers, and blizzards that buried the barn to its roof. We've faced down rustlers and politicians and survived them all. A couple of whiskey runners from Kansas don't scare me. But your men, your livelihood? My men signed on to work for the Montgomery brand, and part of that brand is standing up for what's right. As for my livelihood, he smiled grimly. I've got enough money stored up to hire every gun hand between here and Denver, if it comes to that. Clara felt tears spilling down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the simple fact that someone was willing to fight for her, to risk everything he'd built for a woman he'd known less than a month. Why, she whispered, why would you do this for me? Silas was quiet for a moment, his thumbs tracing gentle circles over her knuckles. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her pay attention. Because it's the right thing to do. Because you deserve someone in your corner for once in your life. And because... He paused, as if the next words were difficult to find. Because I care what happens to you, Clara, more than I expected to, more than might be wise. The admission hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Clara saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he'd opened himself to her judgment, and felt something shift permanently in her chest. I care what happens to you too, she said softly. That's why I'm so afraid. I couldn't bear it if my problems destroyed everything you've worked for. Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen. Silas stood, pulling her up with him. First, we send a response to Judge Marcus. We tell him you're willing to cooperate, but only if he can guarantee your safety and arrange for the testimony to be taken here. And if he can't arrange it, then we'll figure out another way. But Clara, I want you to understand something, whatever happens. You're not facing this alone anymore. We're partners, remember? Partners stand together. As they walked back toward the house, Clara felt the heavy bundle of hidden letters pressing against her leg where she tucked them into her shoe. Judge Marcus wasn't the only one who'd been trying to contact her. There had been other messages, other warnings, from sources she trusted even less. The Kellermans weren't the only dangerous element in this situation, and she wasn't sure how much more truth Silas could handle. But as she looked at his profile, noted the determined set of his jaw, and the protective way he stayed close to her side, Clara made a decision. Whatever came next, she would trust this man who'd married her in haste and defended her without question. She would tell him everything about the other letters, about the federal marshals who might already be watching the ranch, about the complex web of corruption and violence that stretched far beyond a simple murder case. Tonight, after the ranch settled into its evening quiet, she would share the rest of her secrets. And then, for better or worse, they would face the future together, partners in truth as well as name, bound not just by a hastily spoken wedding vow, but by a growing trust that felt more precious than gold. The china set had belonged to Silas's mother, brought west in a wagon train when she was barely 18 and treasured through decades of frontier life. Clara ran her fingers over the delicate blue roses painted on each piece, marveling at how something so fragile had survived the journey and the years. Tonight, for the first time since their marriage, she and Silas would dine in the formal dining room using the good china, marking what felt like a turning point in their relationship. "She would have liked you," Silas said from the doorway, watching. Clara arranged the table with careful precision. "My mother always said a measure of a woman wasn't in her finery, but in how she treated the things entrusted to her care." Clara looked up from smoothing the embroidered tablecloth, noting how the evening light caught the silver threads woven through the fabric. "She sounds like a wise woman. I wish I could have known her. You have more in common with her than you might think. She came from nothing to a Kansas farm family that lost everything to drought. When she married my father, the local socialites treated her much the same way Vivian Ashford treated you. How did she handle it?" Silas smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features. "With grace, mostly, but there was one occasion, ... He paused, as if weighing whether to share the story. The banker's wife made some particularly cruel comments about Mother's background at a church social. The next week, Mother organized a quilting bee and invited every ranch wife and farmer's daughter in the county. By the end of the month, the banker's wife found herself completely excluded from the social circles she'd thought she controlled. Clara laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "She sounds formidable." She was, but never cruel, never petty. She simply made it clear that kindness mattered more than breeding, and that good people deserved respect regardless of their circumstances. As Clara lit the candles that would provide their dinner light, she felt the weight of expectation and legacy. Using this china, dining in this room, she was stepping into a role that had been vacant for nearly 20 years. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "Silas," she said suddenly, "there's something I need to tell you. About the other letters." His hand stilled on the wine bottle he'd been opening. "Other letters?" Clara reached into her shua hiding place that had become habit and withdrew a small bundle of papers tied with string. "These came before Judge Marcus's letter. I should have shown them to you immediately, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd realize how complicated this situation really is, and decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth." Silas set down the wine and crossed to where she stood, taking the bundle with the same careful attention he'd shown her mother's ring. "Clara, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, seeing patience and growing affection there that made her chest tighten with emotion. "There is nothing you could tell me that would make me regret marrying you. Nothing. Do you understand?" She nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. Silas untied the string and spread the letters on the table, his expression growing increasingly grave as he read. The first was from someone signing themselves only as a friend, warning Clara that her location had been discovered and that she should run immediately. The second, dated a week later, was more specific. "The Kellermans have hired professionals. They're coming for you." The third letter made Silas's jaw tighten visibly. It was from Deputy Marshal Thomas Brennan, a man Clara had worked with during the initial investigation. His message was terse. CMF, federal protection authorized if you agree to testify, will arrive Silver Creek June 1st with small detail. Do not trust local law enforcement. Some may be compromised. June 1st, Silas said quietly. That's tomorrow. I know. Clara sank into one of the dining room chairs, suddenly exhausted. I should have told you immediately, but I kept hoping ... I kept thinking maybe if I ignored it all, it would just go away. Clara. Silas knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. This changes things, but it doesn't change what matters most. You're still my wife, still the woman I married because I saw strength and courage in her. These letters just prove I was right about both. But federal marshals, Silas, armed men coming to your ranch, turning your home into a fortress. How can you be so calm about this? Silas was quiet for a moment, his thumbs tracing gentle patterns over her knuckles. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that spoke of old pain carefully contained. I haven't told you much about my father's death, he said finally. About why he really died so soon after my mother. Clara waited, sensing this story mattered. More than she yet understood. He didn't just die of grief, Clara. 3 weeks after Mother's funeral, a group of claim jumpers decided the Montgomery ranch would be easier pickings with just a grieving young man to deal with. They came in the night, armed and confident they could intimidate me into signing over the deed. What happened? Father heard them coming. Despite his illness, despite barely being able to stand, he got out of bed and took up his rifle. He stood on that front porch and told them they could take the ranch over his dead body. Silas's voice grew thick with memory. They obliged him? Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. Oh, Silas. But here's the thing, his stand gave me time to get help, to rally the hands, to fight back. We drove them off, but it cost him his life. As he lay dying, he made me promise something. What? That I would never let fear dictate how I lived. That I would protect what mattered, regardless of the cost. Silas looked directly into her eyes. You matter, Clara. What we're building here matters. I won't let the Kellermans or anyone else take that away through intimidation. The simple declaration broke something loose in Clara's chest. Years of carrying burdens alone, suddenly seeming unnecessary in the face of such steadfast support. She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft press of lips that conveyed gratitude and trust in the beginning of something deeper. When they broke apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers. We'll face whatever comes together. But first, we're going to have dinner using my mother's china and pretend for one evening that we're just a newly married couple getting to know each other. Can we do that? Can we just be normal for a few hours? We can try. And somehow, they managed it. Over roast beef and vegetables from Clara's garden, they talked about everything except federal marshals and murder trials. Silas told her stories about his childhood on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, and his mother's endless patience with a boy who brought home every injured animal he found. Clara shared memories of her parents' farm, of summer evenings when her father would play fiddle on the front porch while her mother sang along in a voice clear as mountain water. What would you like to do with the garden? Silas asked as Clara served the apple pie she'd made that morning. I know Mother had plans for expanding it, maybe adding a greenhouse for the winter months. Really? You'd let me do that? Clara, this is your home now. I want you to make it truly yours. She felt something settle deep in her chest at those words, a sense of belonging she'd thought lost forever. I'd love a greenhouse, and maybe space for herbs, both cooking and medicinal. During the hard years, my mother kept us healthy with remedies from her herb garden. Whatever you want. We'll have Jake start working on plans next week. As the evening wore on, Clara found herself studying Silas's face in the candlelight. noting the way laugh lines crinkled around his eyes when she told funny stories, the gentle way he handled his mother's delicate teacups. This was a man who could be hard as iron when necessary, but possessed unexpected depths of tenderness. "Silas," she said as he walked her to the stairs after dinner, "thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me, for believing in me, for making me feel like I might deserve happiness after all." He stopped at the foot of the stairs, turning to face her fully. "Clara, you don't just deserve happiness. You deserve to be cherished, protected, loved completely. And if you'll let me, I'd like to try to give you those things." The words hung between them, a declaration and an invitation all at once. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she looked into his dark eyes and saw sincerity there that took her breath away. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." Silas reached up to cup her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "We have time, Clara. Whatever comes tomorrow, we have tonight and all the nights after. We have a lifetime to figure this out, do we? With everything that's coming, with the danger, especially because of the danger. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time being afraid of our own feelings." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and Clara felt herself melting into the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless and dizzy, with the realization that somewhere between arriving at his ranch as a desperate woman seeking shelter and standing here in his arms, she had fallen completely in love with her husband. "Good night, Clara," he said softly, pressing one more gentle kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Silas." As Clara prepared for bed, she found herself humming one of the songs her mother used to sing, her hands moving automatically through the familiar rituals while her mind spun with new possibilities. Tomorrow would bring federal marshals and renewed danger, but tonight she was Clara Montgomery, beloved wife of a good man, mistress of a ranch that felt like home. She touched both rings on her fingers, her mother's simple band and Silas's mother's wedding ring, and felt the connection spanning generations. Love had flourished here before, had survived hardship and loss, and emerged stronger. Perhaps it could do so again. Outside her window, the Montana night stretched vast and starlit, full of promise and possibility. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were plotting her destruction. But here in this house that was becoming home, Clara allowed herself to believe that love might be stronger than fear. That partnership might triumph over isolation. As sleep claimed. Clara's last conscious thought was of Silas's voice promising they had a lifetime to figure things out. For the first time in years, a lifetime seemed like something worth fighting for. The stranger arrived at precisely noon, riding a dust-covered horse and wearing the kind of clothes that marked him as someone who traveled far and fast. Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she spotted him approaching the main yard, and something about his purposeful manner made her stomach clench with familiar dread. She abandoned the wet sheets and hurried toward the house, reaching the front porch just as Silas emerged from the barn. The man dismounted with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in the saddle, but Clara noticed he kept his right hand near, his holstered pistol a gunfighter's habit that spoke of dangerous experience. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. "Mr. Montgomery?" The stranger's voice carried the crisp authority of a federal lawman. "I'm Deputy Marshal Thomas Brennan. I believe your wife has been expecting me." Silas glanced toward the porch where Clara stood frozen, her knuckles white where they gripped the railing. "Marshal, we received your letter. Good. And you understand why I'm here." Brennan's gaze shifted to Clara, and she saw recognition in his eyes despite the changes 3 months had wrought in her appearance. "Mrs. Montgomery, or should I say Miss Fitzgerald, we need to talk." "It's Mrs. Montgomery now," Silas said firmly, moving to stand protectively between the marshal and his wife, And anything you have to say to her can be said to both of us. Brennan studied Silas with the same careful attention he'd given the ranch buildings. Mr. Montgomery, I appreciate your loyalty to your wife, but this situation is more complicated than you might realize. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. No. Clara's voice carried across the yard with surprising strength. Whatever you have to say, Marshal Brennan, my husband has a right to hear it. He's already risked everything to protect me. The marshal nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response. Very well. But I suggest we take this conversation inside. What I have to tell you isn't for curious ears. They gathered in Silas's study, the room that had become a sanctuary for Clara during her weeks at the ranch. Marshal Brennan declined the offered coffee, but accepted a chair, his movements economical and precise. Clara noticed he positioned himself where he could watch both the door and the windows, another professional habit that spoke of a dangerous life. Mrs. Montgomery, Brennan began, first, let me say that Judge Marcus sends his regards and his appreciation for your willingness to cooperate. Your testimony is crucial to our case against the Kellerman organization. Our case? Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I thought this was about testifying as a witness. Brennan reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, the movement causing Silas to tense visibly. I'm afraid the situation has evolved since we last corresponded. This is a federal warrant for your arrest, Mrs. Montgomery. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Arrest for what? Conspiracy to commit murder, aiding and abetting known criminals, and obstruction of justice. Brennan's voice was professionally neutral, but Clara caught a flash of what might have been sympathy in his eyes. It seems Nathan Kellerman has been busy since you disappeared. Silas was on his feet instantly, his face dark with fury. What the hell are you talking about? My wife is the victim here, not the criminal. Mr. Montgomery, please sit down. This is as much a shock to me as it is to you. Brennan waited until Silas reluctantly resumed his seat. 3 weeks ago, a man named William Garrett came forward claiming he witnessed the murder you described. Mrs. Montgomery, according to his testimony, you weren't just an innocent bystander. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. There was no one else there except. She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth as realization hit her. Except who, Mrs. Montgomery? Billy Garrett, she whispered. He worked at the boarding house, did odd jobs for Mrs. Henderson, but he wasn't in the alley that night. He couldn't have been. According to his sworn statement, he was. And he claims you arranged the meeting between Marshal Davidson and the Kellermans. That you were working as an informant for the gang, feeding them information about federal investigations. That's insane. Clara shot to her feet, pacing to the window as if she could escape the nightmare by putting distance between herself and the marshal's words. Billy Garrett is lying. He has to be. Why would he lie about something that could get him killed? Brennan asked quietly. The Kellermans don't tolerate loose ends, Mrs. Montgomery. If Garrett was going to fabricate a story, why would he implicate himself in a federal murder case? Silas's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Because someone paid him to, or threatened him, or both. Brennan nodded approvingly. You're thinking like a lawman, Mr. Montgomery. That's exactly what Judge Marcus and I suspect. But proving, it is another matter entirely. Clara turned from the window, her mind racing through possibilities. What does Billy's statement actually say? Exactly. The marshal consulted his notes. That you approached him 2 weeks before the murder, offering him money to help you set up a meeting between Marshal Davidson and Nathan Kellerman. That you claimed you were working undercover for the federal marshals, but that you are actually feeding information to the gang, and that after the murder, you helped dispose of evidence and plan the cover-up. None of that is true. Not one word. I believe you, Brennan said simply, but a federal grand jury found Garrett's testimony credible enough to issue this warrant. which puts us all in a very difficult position." Silas leaned forward, his businessman's mind engaging with the problem. "What exactly does this warrant allow you to do?" "Technically, I'm authorized to arrest Mrs. Montgomery and transport her back to Kansas for trial. But Judge Marcus and I have concerns about her safety if that happens." "What kind of concerns?" Brennan was quiet for a moment, weighing his words carefully. "Mrs. Montgomery, how well did you know Billy Garrett?" Clara sank back into her chair, exhaustion replacing the initial shock. "Well enough. He'd been at the boarding house for about 6 months. Always seemed harmless. A little slow, maybe, but honest. Mrs. Henderson trusted him with money, with keys to the rooms." "And he knew you witnessed the murder?" Yes, probably. He found me in the kitchen afterward, shaking and crying. I told him I'd seen something terrible in the alley, that I had to leave town immediately. He helped me pack, even gave me $5 from his own savings." $5? Brennan's eyebrows rose. "That's a significant sum for a handyman." "It was everything he had." He said ... Clara's voice broke slightly. "He said no woman should have to face danger alone." Silas reached over and took her hand, offering what comfort he could while absorbing the implications of this new information. "Marshal, if Billy Garrett helped my wife escape, why would he later testify against her?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Brennan stood and moved to the window, his practiced eye scanning the horizon. "Judge Marcus believes Garrett was coerced into changing his story, probably threatened, possibly tortured. The Kellermans have a talent for turning honest people into unwilling accomplices." "So what happens now?" Clara asked. "Do you arrest Emmy?" Brennan turned from the window, his expression grim. "That's where things get complicated. Judge Marcus sent me here with official orders to bring you back for trial. But he also gave me unofficial discretion to ensure your safety takes priority over procedural requirements." "Meaning?" "Meaning if I believe your life would be in immediate danger upon returning to Kansas, I'm authorized to delay the arrest until additional security measures can be arranged." Silas felt a flicker of hope. "And do you believe her life would be in danger?" "Mr. Montgomery, in the past 3 weeks, 2 other witnesses in this case have died under suspicious circumstances. A federal prosecutor who was building the case against the Kellermans was killed in what the local sheriff is calling a robbery gone wrong. And Billy Garrett himself was found dead in his boarding house room 4 days ago." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the mantel clock and Clara's sharp intake of breath. "Billy's dead?" she whispered. "Shot twice in the chest, the same way Marshal Davidson was killed. No witnesses, no suspects, no evidence except a room that had been thoroughly searched." Brennan's voice carried the weight of professional frustration. Whatever Billy Garrett knew, whoever forced him to change his testimony, they made sure he couldn't recant. Clara felt tears streaming down her face for Billy, for the young man who'd helped her escape and paid for it with his life, for the tangled web of violence that seemed to follow her wherever she went. "So what you're really telling us," Silas said slowly, "is that my wife isn't just a witness anymore. She's the only remaining witness." "Exactly. Which makes her both invaluable to our case and extraordinarily dangerous to the Kellermans." Brennan returned to his chair, leaning forward earnestly. "Mrs. Montgomery, Judge Marcus believes you're the key to breaking this organization, but he also believes they'll stop at nothing to silence you permanently. Then what's the solution?" Clara asked through her tears. "I can't run forever, and I can't hide here while good people die, because I'm too frightened to do what's right." Brennan was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his coat again. This time he withdrew a yellowed piece of paper that looked like it had been hastily torn from a larger document. "This," he said, placing it on Silas's desk, "might be our answer." Clara leaned forward to read the cramped handwriting, her eyes widening as she absorbed the contents. It was a partial confession, signed by Billy Garrett and dated the day before his death, ... forced me to lie about CMF. She never did nothing wrong. Never helped nobody get hurt. They said they'd kill Mrs. Henderson if I didn't say what they wanted. I can't live with this no more. The truth is, ... The writing ended abruptly, as if Billy had been interrupted. Where did you find this? Silas demanded. Hidden in Billy's Bible, tucked between the pages of Psalms. It seems he was trying to set the record straight before they killed him. Brennan's expression was grim. This document changes everything. Mrs. Montgomery, it proves you were telling the truth about that night, and it implicates the Kellermans in witness intimidation and murder. But it's incomplete, Clara protested. Billy never finished writing whatever he was trying to say. No, but what he did write is enough to cast serious doubt on his original testimony. Combined with your first-hand account of the murder, Judge Marcus believes we can build a case that doesn't require you to return to Kansas. How? By bringing the trial here, to Montana Territory, under federal jurisdiction, with you testifying under the protection of federal marshals. Brennan smiled for the first time since his arrival. It seems your husband's suggestion about taking testimony by deposition was more prescient than any of us realized. Clara felt a surge of hope so strong it made her dizzy. You mean I wouldn't have to go back? I could testify from here? Not just testify. Host the entire proceeding. Judge Marcus has the authority to convene a federal court anywhere within his jurisdiction. If we can guarantee your safety and the integrity of the process, he's willing to bring the trial to you. Silas was already thinking ahead, his mind engaging with logistics. What would that involve? How many people? How much security? A federal judge, a prosecutor, defense attorneys, a jury pool, court reporters, and at least a dozen federal marshals for security. We're talking about essentially moving a federal courthouse to your ranch for the duration of the trial. Which could be how long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Depends on how thoroughly the defense wants to cross-examine witnesses and present their case. Clara looked around the study that had become her sanctuary, trying to imagine it transformed into a courtroom, filled with lawyers and marshals and the machinery of federal justice. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. There's one more thing, Brennan said quietly. Judge Marcus wants your answer within 48 hours. The Kellermans know I'm here, know I've found you. If we're going to do this, we need to move quickly before they can interfere. As the marshal prepared to leave, promising to return the next day for their decision, Clara found herself standing at the window, watching him ride away. Behind her, Silas was already making notes, planning security measures and logistical arrangements. With the same methodical approach he applied to ranch management. Silas, she said without turning around, are you sure about this? Hosting a federal trial, having our home invaded by lawyers and marshals and reporters? His arms came around her from behind, solid and reassuring. Clara, 3 weeks ago you were just a woman seeking shelter. Today, you're the key to bringing down a criminal organization that's terrorized innocent people for years. That's not a burden, it's a calling. She leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his unwavering support. And if something goes wrong? If the Kellermans find a way to get to me despite all the security, then we'll face it together. Partners, remember? Clara touched the rings on her fingers' symbols of love that had endured through generations, through hardship and loss and triumph. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she was Clara Montgomery, beloved wife and trusted partner, standing in her own home with a man who believed she was worth fighting for. Partners, she agreed, and felt the truth of it settle deep in her bones. The rifle had belonged to Silas's father, a Winchester Model 1873 that had seen action against claim jumpers and predators of both the 4-legged and 2-legged variety. Now it lay across Silas's lap as he sat on the front porch in the pre-dawn. Darkness, watching the horizon for signs of movement while the ranch prepared for what might be its greatest test. 48 hours had passed since Marshal Brennan's visit. 48 hours during which the Montgomery ranch had transformed from a peaceful cattle operation into something resembling a military encampment. Federal marshals had arrived in groups of 2 and 3, seasoned men who moved with the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to danger. They'd taken up positions around the ranch buildings, established patrol routes, and set up a communication system that would have impressed a cavalry commander. Clara emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, her footsteps soft on the wooden porch boards. She'd been awake for hours, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, her mind racing through the events that had led them to this moment. In 3 days, Judge Marcus would arrive with his traveling court and the trial that would determine not just the fate of the Kellerman gang, but the future of her marriage would begin. "Any word from the perimeter guards?" she asked, settling into the chair beside Silas and handing him the steaming cup. "All quiet. Jake reports no unusual movement along the access roads, and the marshals haven't spotted anything suspicious." Silas accepted the coffee gratefully, noting how Clara's hands trembled slightly as she held her own cup. "How are you holding up?" "I keep thinking about Billy Garrett," she admitted. "About how he helped me escape, gave me his last $5, and died because of it. If I hadn't involved him." "Clara," Silas's voice carried the gentle firmness that had become familiar over their weeks together. "Billy Garrett died because the Kellermans are killers who eliminate anyone who threatens them. You didn't cause his death any more than you caused the drought that destroyed your family's farm." She knew he was right intellectually, but the guilt still gnawed at her. Every person who'd been hurt because of her knowledge, every federal marshal now risking his life to protect her, every disruption to the peaceful life Silas had built, it all felt like a weight on her shoulders that grew heavier with each passing hour. "Tell me again why we're doing this," she said quietly. "Why we're not just running, finding somewhere even more remote where the past can't follow us." Silas set down his coffee and turned to face her fully, his dark eyes serious in the lamplight that spilled from the house windows. "Because running never really works, Clara. I learned that watching my father deal with the claim jumpers. They kept coming back, kept pushing, until he finally stood his ground. Sometimes the only way to end a threat is to face it head on. But the cost of running would be higher. You'd spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, never able to trust anyone completely, never able to build anything lasting because you'd always be ready to abandon it." His voice grew softer. "I won't live that way, and I won't ask you to live that way." From the barn came the low murmur of voices as the night shift of marshals changed positions. Clara counted at least a dozen men in addition to the ranch hands, all of them armed and alert. The sight should have been reassuring, but instead reminded her of just how dangerous their situation had become. "Marshal Brennan thinks the Kellermans will try something before the trial starts," she said. "He's convinced they won't wait. To see if I actually testify, probably not. Men like that don't take chances when they can act decisively." Silas checked the rifle's action, a habit that had become automatic over the past 2 days. "But they're dealing with federal marshals now, not small-town sheriffs they can intimidate or buy off. And they're dealing with you." The simple statement carried more weight than Clara had intended. Over the past weeks, she'd seen glimpses of the steel beneath Silas's quiet demeanor, but the arrival of the marshals had revealed depths she hadn't suspected. He'd transformed from a prosperous rancher into something resembling a military commander, coordinating defenses with professional efficiency while maintaining the ranch's normal operations. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," Clara continued. "About your parents, about the kind of love they shared. Do you think we could have that someday? If we survive all this?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains barely visible against the star-filled sky. When he spoke, his voice carried a certainty that made Clara's heart skip. I think we already do, in a way. Maybe not the romantic love of novels and poetry, but something deeper. Partnership, trust, the willingness to stand together against whatever comes. He turned to meet her eyes. I love you, Clara. Not because you're beautiful, though you are. Not because you're convenient, though that hasn't been the case. I love you because you're brave enough to do what's right, even when it terrifies you. The declaration hung in the morning air like mist, transforming everything while changing nothing. Clara felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally hearing words she dreamed of but never expected to receive. I love you too, she whispered. More than I thought possible, more than I knew. I was capable of feeling. You saved me, Silas. Not just from the Kellermans, but from believing I wasn't worth saving. They sat in comfortable silence as the eastern horizon began to lighten. Holding hands like a newly married couple, they technically were, but had never quite felt like until this moment. Around them, the ranch slowly came to life, cattle lowing. In the distance, horses nickering in the corral. The ranch hands beginning their morning routines under the watchful eyes of federal protection. There's something I want to show you, Silas said suddenly, rising from his chair. Something I probably should have shown you weeks ago. He led her into the house and up the stairs to a room she'd never entered, his parents' old bedroom, preserved, exactly as it had been on the day his mother died. Dust motes danced in the morning light, streaming through lace curtains, and the air held the faint scent of lavender that had been his mother's favorite. On the dresser sat a silver-framed photograph she'd never seen, showing a young couple standing in front of the half-built ranch house. The woman wore a simple dress not unlike the one Clara had arrived in, while the man's arm rested protectively around her shoulders. But it was their expressions that caught Clara's attention, the way they looked at each other with complete trust and devotion, as if they were the only two people in the world. This was taken 6 months after they married, Silas said quietly. She'd just learned she was carrying me, and they were planning the addition that would become the nursery. Clara studied the photograph, noting the similarities between herself and the young woman who'd become Silas's mother. Not physical similarities, but something deeper, a quality of determination, mixed with vulnerability that spoke of strength. Forged by hardship, they looked so happy, so certain of their future together. They were. But they also knew it wouldn't be easy. Indians were still raiding in those days. The nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away, and they were building something from nothing with little more than hope and stubbornness. Silas picked up the frame, his fingers tracing the glass that covered his parents' faces. But they believed in each other, and that was enough. Why are you showing me this now? Because I want you to understand something. Whatever happens in the next few days, whatever the trial brings or the Kellermans attempt, we're not just fighting for justice or safety. We're fighting for the right to build something lasting together, the way my parents did. Clara felt something shift deep in her chest, a recognition that their marriage had evolved far beyond its practical origins. They were no longer two strangers thrown together by circumstance, but partners in the truest sense, bound not just by legal documents, but by shared trials and growing love. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Jake Hartwell's voice carried up the stairs with the urgency that had become common over the past 2 days. Boss, Mrs. Montgomery. Marshal Brennan's riding in with news. They found the marshal in the kitchen, accepting coffee from Maria while his weathered face bore expressions of both satisfaction and concern. He looked like a man who'd been riding hard, his clothes dusty and his horse lathered despite the early hour. Good news and bad news, Brennan said without preamble. Judge Marcus will arrive tomorrow afternoon with the full court party. 12 marshals for security, plus prosecutors, court reporters, and a jury pool drawn from the territorial registry. That's the good news? Clara asked. That's the good news. The bad news is that our sources in Kansas report Nathan Kellerman left Wichita 3 days ago with at least 6 hired guns. They're heading this way, and they're not coming to attend the trial as spectators. Silas felt his grip tighten on the rifle he'd brought down from the bedroom. How far out are they? Could arrive as early as tonight, more likely tomorrow morning. They'll probably scout the area first, try to assess our defenses before making their move. What about local law enforcement? Clara asked. Can't the territorial sheriff provide additional support? Brennan's expression grew grim. Sheriff Morrison is a good man, but he's got exactly 2 deputies and responsibility for territory the size of some eastern states. He'll do what he can, but this is really a federal matter now. As the marshal outlined defensive positions and communication protocols, Clara found herself studying the faces of the men who'd sworn to protect her. These were professionals who'd faced dangerous criminals before, but something in their manner suggested this case was different, more personal somehow, more crucial to the larger fight between law and lawlessness in the territories. Mrs. Montgomery, Brennan said as he prepared to leave, I need you to understand something. Once the trial starts, there's no backing out. You'll be committed to seeing this through to the end, regardless of what the Kellermans attempt. I understand, do you? Because these men we're facing, they don't just kill witnesses. They make examples of them, send messages that discourage others from cooperating with federal authorities. If they get their hands on you, ... They won't, Silas interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Whatever it takes, they won't. After the marshal left, Clara and Silas walked the perimeter of the ranch buildings, ostensibly checking security, but really just needing to move, to feel like they were doing something productive, rather than simply waiting for danger to arrive. The marshals nodded respectfully as they passed. These federal lawmen, who'd accepted a rancher's wife as their primary responsibility. Silas, Clara said as they paused near the corral, where the horses watched them with intelligent eyes. If something happens to me during the trial, nothing will happen to you. But if it does, I want you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Meeting you, marrying you, becoming part of this place, it's given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope, the belief that good things can happen to ordinary people, that love can grow even in the most unlikely circumstances. Clara turned to face him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. Whatever tomorrow brings, I want you to remember that you saved me in every way a person can be saved. Silas pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the Montana sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Around them, the ranch hummed with activity as marshals and ranch hands prepared for whatever the Kellermans might bring. But in this moment, there was only the 2 of them, and the love that had somehow bloomed in the space between necessity and choice. Tomorrow, Silas said quietly, we start the trial that will either end this threat forever or force us to fight for our lives. But tonight, we're just husband and wife, standing on our own land, planning a future together. Clara leaned into his strength, drawing courage from his certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it as partners in name, in truth, and in the kind of love that endured beyond circumstance or danger. The trial would test everything they'd built together, but it would not break them. They had too much to fight for to allow that to happen. The attack came at dawn, just as the ranch hands were beginning their morning chores and the coffee was brewing in the kitchen. Clara was in the study, reviewing her testimony notes one final time before Judge Marcus's arrival, when the first shots shattered the peaceful morning air. The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions, suggesting the Kellermans had positioned their men strategically around the ranch perimeter. Get down, Silas shouted, bursting through the study door and pulling Clara to the floor behind his heavy oak desk. Outside, she could hear the federal marshals returning fire, their disciplined volleys contrasting sharply with the wild shooting of their attackers. How many? Clara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Hard to tell. Brennan estimated at least 6, but it sounds like more. Silas checked his rifle, then moved to the window, staying low as he assessed the situation. They're good hitting us from 3 sides at once, trying to divide our attention. Marshal Brennan's voice carried across the yard, shouting orders to his men with the calm authority of someone accustomed to chaos. Henderson, Rodriguez, hold the barn. Collins, take 2 men and secure the corral. Nobody fires unless you have a clear target. Clara crawled to the window beside Silas, peering through the heavy curtains at the scene outside. She could see muzzle flashes from the tree line beyond the main yard, answering shots from behind various ranch buildings where the marshals had taken cover. It was organized chaos, each side trying to gain tactical advantage while avoiding unnecessary casualties. There, Silas pointed toward a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. Movement in the trees, at least 3 men. As if summoned by his words, a figure stepped into the open, a tall man with graying hair and cold eyes that Clara recognized from newspaper illustrations. Nathan Kellerman himself, holding a white cloth tied to a rifle barrel in the universal sign of parley. Clara Montgomery. His voice carried clearly across the morning air, amplified by the temporary ceasefire his appearance had created. I want to talk to you. Brennan emerged from behind the water trough, his pistol drawn butt lowered. State your business, Kellerman. My business is with the lady. She has something that belongs to me, and I want it back. Clara felt ice form in her stomach. What does he mean? Something that belongs to him? Before anyone could answer, Jake Harkwell appeared at the study door, his face grim. Mrs. Montgomery, there's something you need to see. He held out a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Found this hidden in Billy Garrett's effects, the ones Marshal Brennan brought from Kansas. Clara took the journal with trembling hands, recognizing Billy's careful handwriting on the first page. But as she read, her blood turned to ice. The entries detailed payments received from Nathan Kellerman, instructions for watching federal marshals, and most damning of all, a plan to use Clara as unwitting bait to lure Marshal Davidson into the alley that night. No, she whispered. This can't be right. Billy helped me escape. He gave me money. He warned me. Keep reading, Jake said quietly. The later entries told a different story. Billy's growing guilt, his realization that Clara was genuinely innocent, his decision to help her escape as penance for his role in the marshal's death. The final entry, dated the day before his murder, was a full confession of his crimes and a detailed account of the Kellerman organization's corruption network. He was working for them, Clara said, her voice hollow with shock. Billy Garrett was a paid informant for the Kellermans. But he turned against them in the end, Silas pointed out. This journal proves the Kellermans corrupted him, then killed him when he tried to make amends. Outside, Nathan Kellerman was growing impatient. I know you can hear me, Clara. Come out and we can settle this without any more bloodshed. All I want is what Billy Garrett stole from me before he died. Brennan cupped his hands and shouted back, She's under federal protection, Kellerman. You want to talk to her? You do it through me. That's not how this works, Marshal. Kellerman's voice carried a note of mockery. You see, I have something you might find interesting. He gestured toward the tree line, and 2 of his men emerged, roughly dragging a third figure between them. Clara's heart stopped as she recognized Judge Marcus, his judicial robes torn and bloodied, his hands bound behind his back. We intercepted his honor about 5 miles out, Kellerman called. Seems he was eager to get to his traveling courthouse. Now he gets to see justice from a different perspective. The sight of the elderly judge, beaten and helpless, sent rage coursing through Clara's veins. This man had dedicated his life to fighting corruption, had risked everything to bring the Kellermans to justice, and now he was paying the price for her testimony. Let him go. She shouted before anyone could stop her, standing up despite Silas's attempt to pull her back down. "This is between you and me, Kellerman." Nathan Kellerman's cold smile was visible even from a distance. "There's the girl I remember, always trying to do the right thing, even when it gets people killed. What do you want?" "Billy's journal. The real one, not whatever edited version the marshals showed you. Plus your word that you'll never testify against my organization." "And if I refuse?" Kellerman drew his pistol and placed it against Judge Marcus's temple. "Then His Honor here learns what happens to federal officials who interfere with my business." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara could feel every eye on her, could sense the weight of impossible choices pressing down like a physical force. Give Kellerman what he wanted, and a lifetime of federal investigations would crumble. Refuse, and watch a good man die for her principles. "There has to be another way," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "There is." The voice came from behind Kellerman, and Clara gasped as she recognized the speaker. Billy Garrett stepped out of the trees, very much alive despite the reports of his death, holding a rifle trained on his supposed employer. "Hello, Clara," Billy said, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Sorry for the deception, but it was the only way to get close enough to end this." Nathan Kellerman spun around, his face registering shock and fury. "You're supposed to be dead." "Faked my own death with help from the federal marshals. Been tracking you ever since, waiting for the right moment." Billy's rifle never wavered. "Let the judge go, Nathan. It's over. Like hell it is." Kellerman swung his pistol toward Billy, but the younger man was ready. The gunshot echoed across the ranch yard like thunder, and Nathan Kellerman dropped his knees, clutching his shoulder. His hired guns, caught off guard by Billy's resurrection and their leader's wound, hesitated just long enough for the federal marshals to gain the advantage. "This is Deputy Marshal Thomas Brennan." The marshal's voice carried absolute authority. "You're surrounded by federal officers. Drop your weapons and surrender." What followed was less a battle than a rout. Faced with organized federal resistance and the shocking appearance of their supposedly dead informant, the Kellerman gang's resolve crumbled. Some threw down their weapons immediately. Others tried to fight their way out, only to find themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by men who'd spent their careers hunting criminals across the frontier. Within minutes, it was over. Nathan Kellerman lay bleeding in the dirt, his brother Marcus in federal custody, and their hired guns either dead or captured. The threat that had haunted Clara for months had been ended not by a grand courtroom victory, but by the courage of a simple man who'd chosen redemption over self-preservation. As the marshals secured the prisoners and tended to Judge Marcus's injuries, Clara found herself standing in the yard, staring at Billy Garrett with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why fake your death? Why put yourself at such risk?" Billy's young face carried the weight of hard choices and harder redemptions. "Because you gave me $5 when you didn't have 5 cents to spare. Because you thanked me for helping you when I was the reason you needed help in the first place." He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "Because somebody had to make it right, Clara, and I was the only one who could." Judge Marcus, his wounds cleaned and bandaged, approached with the careful dignity of a man who'd seen justice served despite personal cost. "Mrs. Montgomery, it appears your testimony won't be necessary after all. Between Mr. Garrett's journal and his willingness to testify, we have enough evidence to convict the entire Kellerman organization." Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd carried so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "It's really over? It's really over." As the prisoners were loaded into wagons for transport back to Kansas, Clara stood beside Silas on their front porch, watching the sun climb higher over the Montana mountains. The ranch yard, so recently a battlefield, was already returning to its peaceful rhythms as the hands went about their morning chores. "What happens now?" she asked. Silas's arm came around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. Now we get back to the business of being married, building a life together, planning that greenhouse you wanted, maybe thinking about adding to the family. Clara leaned into his embrace, feeling truly safe for the first time in months. The past had finally released its hold on her, and the future stretched ahead filled with possibilities she'd never dared imagine. "I love you, Silas Montgomery," she said quietly. "I love you too, Clara Montgomery. And I always will." The wedding band caught the late afternoon sunlight as Clara helped. Maria prepared dinner for the federal marshals, who would be staying one more night before escorting their prisoners back to Kansas. The simple gold circle had become more than a symbol of marriage. It represented survival, partnership, and the kind of love that grew stronger under pressure rather than wilting beneath it. "Senora," Maria said quietly, as they worked side by side preparing roast beef and vegetables. "You look different today. Lighter, somehow." Clara smiled, realizing the older woman was right. For the first time in months, she wasn't looking over her shoulder or listening for approaching hoofbeats that might bring danger. The constant tension that had become her normal state was finally beginning to ease. "I feel different," she admitted, "like I can finally breathe properly again." Through the kitchen window, she could see Silas talking with Marshal Brennan near the corral, their conversation animated but relaxed. The crisis that had brought such chaos to their peaceful ranch was truly over, and both men seemed to be coming to terms with what that meant for their future. Billy Garrett sat on the front porch steps, cleaning his rifle with the methodical attention of someone who'd learned to value proper maintenance through hard experience. Judge Marcus had offered him a full federal pardon in exchange for his cooperation, along with a job as a deputy marshal if he wanted it. The young man was still considering the offer, though Clara suspected he'd accept. He'd found his calling in the fight against corruption, and men like him were sorely needed in the territories. "Mrs. Montgomery?" Pete Collins appeared in the kitchen doorway, hat in hand and face flushed with excitement. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but there's riders coming up the main road. Looks like folks from town." Clara dried her hands on her apron and followed Pete outside, where she could see a small procession of buggies and riders approaching the ranch. As they drew closer, she recognized several faces from Silver Creek Sheriff Morrison, Dr. Hayes, and surprisingly, several of the women who treated her so coldly at the church social. "What do you suppose they want?" she asked Silas as he joined her on the porch. "Only one way to find out." The procession pulled to a stop in the ranch yard, and Sheriff Morrison dismounted first, his weathered face grave but respectful. Behind him, Clara was surprised to see Vivian Ashford climbing down from an elegant buggy, her usual haughty expression replaced by something that might have been shame. "Mrs. Montgomery," Sheriff Morrison said, removing his hat, "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but when word reached town about what happened here this morning, well, folks felt they needed to come pay their respects." "Respects?" "Ma'am, what you did standing up to those killers, helping bring them to justice, that took more courage than most folks see in a lifetime." The sheriff's voice carried genuine admiration. "The whole territory owes you a debt of gratitude." Vivian Ashford stepped forward, her hands clasped nervously in front of her expensive dress. "Mrs. Montgomery, I owe you an apology. A sincere and public apology for how we treated you when you first arrived in Silver Creek." Clara felt Silas's hand settle on her lower back, offering quiet support as she faced the woman who'd been so cruel just weeks before. "Mrs. Ashford, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is." Vivian's voice carried a conviction that surprised everyone present. "We judged you by your clothes and your circumstances instead of your character. We were wrong, and we were unkind, and we're ashamed of ourselves." Prudence Wade stepped forward from the group, her round face earnest. "Mrs. Montgomery, we were wondering, that is, we'd like to invite you to become president of our Ladies' Auxiliary." We've been discussing it, and we all agree you're exactly the kind of woman our community needs as a leader." The irony wasn't lost on Clara. The same women who'd mocked her poverty now wanted her to lead their charitable organization. But looking at their faces, she saw genuine remorse and respect rather than the condescension that had marked their previous interactions. "That's very kind of you," Clara said carefully, "but I think you might be overestimating my qualifications." "Ma'am," Dr. Hayes spoke up from the back of the group, "you've shown more grace and courage in one morning than most of us manage in a year. Far as qualifications go, I'd say you've got the only ones that really matter." As the townspeople continued offering their apologies and praise, Clara found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 weeks ago, she'd stepped off a train wearing a threadbare dress and carrying nothing but a carpetbag in desperate hope. Now she stood on her own front porch, surrounded by federal marshals and respected by the community that had once scorned her. "Thank you all for coming," she said finally, "and I accept your apologies, though I understand why you reacted as you did. I know I didn't look like what you expected in a rancher's wife." "That's exactly the point," Vivian said quietly. "We learned today that appearances can be terribly deceiving. A woman in a patched dress can have more character than someone in the finest silk, and we should have seen that from the beginning." After the townspeople left, promising to return for a proper celebration once Clara had time to recover from the morning's events, she found herself alone with Silas on the front porch as the sun began to set behind the mountains. The federal marshals were preparing for their departure in the morning. The ranch hands were settling the livestock for the night, and the familiar peaceful rhythms of their life together were reasserting themselves. "Do you realize what just happened?" Silas asked, pulling Clara close against his side. "The Kellermans were captured?" "More than that. You've become a legend, Clara. The story of the mail-order bride who brought down a criminal empire is going to spread from here to California. People will talk about this for decades." Clara considered this, not sure how she felt about becoming the subject of frontier legends. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No, you did what Clara Montgomery would have done. You stood up for what was right, even when it put you in danger." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm proud to be married to you, even though I brought chaos and gunfights to your peaceful ranch, especially because of that. Peaceful can be boring after a while." As they sat watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Clara reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She'd come west seeking anonymity and safety, but instead had found love, purpose, and a community that valued her for who she was rather than what she possessed. "Silas," she said quietly, "what do you think would have happened if I'd been refined lady the matchmaker promised? If I'd arrived in silk and lace with a proper dowry? Honestly, I probably would have been polite, but distant. I'd spent years avoiding women who wanted my money more than me." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I needed someone who understood hardship, who knew the value of simple things. I needed someone real. And instead you got someone with a price on her head and federal marshals camping in your barn. I got someone who made my house feel like a home for the first time since my parents died. I got a partner who stands beside me instead of behind me or in front of me." He turned to look at her directly. "I got everything I never knew I wanted." The simple declaration brought tears to Clara's eyes, happy tears that spoke of relief and gratitude and the overwhelming joy of being truly known and loved by another person. "I love you, Silas Montgomery," she whispered. "More than I thought possible. I love you too, Clara Montgomery. And tomorrow, when all the marshals and excitement are gone, we're going to start planning that greenhouse you wanted. Maybe design an addition to the house while we're at it." "An addition?" "For the children we're going to have. Lots of children, if you're willing. This ranch needs the sound of young voices again." Clara felt her heart swell with possibilities she'd never dared imagine during her years of struggle and fear. A future filled with children's laughter, with gardens and growth, and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting with someone who loved her completely. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." As they prepared for bed that night, Clara caught sight of herself in the mirror of their bedroom now, not the guest room where she'd spent her first weeks at the ranch. She looked different somehow, not just in her clothes or her surroundings, but in her bearing. The frightened woman who'd stepped off the train in Silver Creek was gone, replaced by someone who stood straighter, smiled more easily, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her worth. She touched the wedding band on her finger, thinking of the generations of love it represented, and the new chapter she and Silas were writing together. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but they would face them as partners, bound not just by legal documents, but by the kind of deep, abiding love that grew stronger with each trial overcome. The past had finally released its hold on her, and the future stretched ahead, bright with promise. 6 months later, Clara stood in the doorway of the greenhouse Silas had built for her, watching the early morning light filter through the glass panels and illuminate the thriving garden within. Tomatoes hung heavy on their vines, despite the October chill outside, and herbs filled the air with fragrances that reminded her of her mother's kitchen garden back in Kansas. The space had become her sanctuary, a place where she could nurture life and watch things grow under her careful tending. The family portrait sat on a small table near the entrance, its silver frame catching the morning sunlight. The photographer had come from Denver specifically to capture this moment. Clara and Silas, standing together in front of their ranch house, surrounded by the people who'd become their extended family. Jake Hartwell stood beside them with the dignity of a man who'd helped build something lasting, while Maria Santos smiled from her position, holding the baby she helped deliver just 2 months before. Clara touched her still tender middle, marveling at how quickly their lives had expanded to accommodate new joy. Little Thomas Montgomery, named for Silas's father, was sleeping peacefully in the house under Maria's watchful eye, his tiny presence having transformed their quiet home into something vibrant and full of purpose. "Admiring your kingdom?" Silas appeared behind her, slipping his arms around her waist and pressing a gentle kiss to her neck. "Just thinking about how much has changed since I first arrived here. Sometimes it feels like a dream. The good kind, I hope." Clara leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. "The very best kind. The kind where you wake up and realize your life is better than anything you dared imagine." Through the greenhouse windows, she could see the ranch bustling with its usual morning activity. Pete Collins was working with a young gelding in the corral, his patient methods clearly influenced by Miguel Santos's teaching. Tom Bradley directed the movement of cattle to winter pastures, his weather-beaten face showing satisfaction with the healthy condition of the herd. Everything spoke of prosperity and careful management, of a life built on solid foundations that would endure through whatever challenges lay ahead. "Any word from Billy?" Clara asked, noting a rider approaching the main house. "Letter came yesterday. He's been promoted to deputy marshal, stationed in Cheyenne now. Says he likes the work, feels like he's making a real difference." Silas paused, his voice carrying pride in the young man's redemption. "He also says Nathan Kellerman was sentenced to life in prison, along with his surviving associates. The judge made it clear that intimidating federal witnesses carries severe consequences." Clara felt a final weight lift from her shoulders. The last shadow of her dangerous past had been officially banished, leaving her free to embrace the future without reservation. "Mrs. Montgomery?" Maria's voice called from the house, carrying the gentle urgency that meant baby Thomas was stirring. "I think someone wants his mama." Clara smiled and started toward the house, but Silas caught her hand, pulling her back for a moment. "Clara, there's something I want to tell you. Something I've been thinking about since Thomas was born." "What is it?" Silas reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, similar to the one that had held his mother's wedding ring, but clearly new. I know we've already done the practical wedding, the hasty wedding, and even the public wedding when the whole town came to celebrate after the trial. But I want to do one more wedding. Clara's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold band set with a single diamond modest by the standards of wealthy Eastern families, but breathtaking in its simple elegance. I want to marry you again, Clara, not because we need to, not because circumstances demand it, but because I choose to. Because after everything we've been through, I want to stand before God and our community and promise you again that I'll love you for the rest of my life. Tears gathered in Clara's eyes as she looked at the ring, then up at the man who'd given her everything she'd never dared hope for. Silas, we're already married. We have been for months. Legally, yes. But I want to marry you with my whole heart, this time with complete knowledge of who you are and what we mean to each other. He knelt on one knee right there in the greenhouse, among the plants she'd nurtured and the life they'd built together. Clara Mae Montgomery, will you marry me? Again? For always? The question hung in the warm air between them, transforming what should have been a simple moment into something profound. Clara thought of the frightened woman who'd stepped off the train in Silver Creek, of the desperate hope that had carried her across the continent, of the gradual transformation from stranger to partner to beloved wife. Yes, she whispered then. Louder? Yes, Silas Montgomery, I'll marry you again. For always. He slipped the new ring onto her finger beside the other two, creating a set that told the story of their journey together, her mother's simple band representing hope carried from the past, his mother's wedding ring symbolizing the legacy they'd inherited, and now this new circle representing the future they were choosing to build together. As they walked back to the house, hand in hand, Clara reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought her to this moment. She'd answered a mail-order bride advertisement out of desperation, seeking nothing more than safety and shelter. Instead, she'd found love, purpose, and a place where she belonged completely. The ranch spread around them like a promise fulfilled, its buildings solid and prosperous, its people content and secure. In the distance, she could see the beginnings of the town that was growing up around their success. New businesses, new families, new dreams taking root in the Montana soil. Baby Thomas's cries were growing more insistent, and Clara quickened her pace, eager to hold her son and continue the daily routine that had become her greatest joy. As she nursed him in the rocking chair Silas had carved with his own hands, she thought about the future they were building together. Their children would grow up knowing they were wanted and loved, surrounded by the kind of community that valued character over circumstances. They would learn the satisfaction of honest work, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the truth that love freely given returns multiplied. What are you thinking about? Silas asked, settling into the chair beside her with a cup of coffee. Everything. The future, the past. How blessed I am to be here with you and Thomas. Any regrets? Clara considered the question seriously, thinking of all the hardships that had led her to this moment. The loss of her parents' farm, the years of struggle and fear, even the danger that had followed her to Montana, all of it had been necessary to bring her to exactly where she needed to be. No regrets, she said finally. If I hadn't lost everything in Kansas, I never would have found everything here. As the afternoon light faded into evening, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Clara stood at her kitchen window, preparing dinner for her family. The room was warm with the scents of roasting chicken and fresh bread, filled with the comfortable sounds of home. Silas's voice as he discussed the day's work with Jake, Maria humming as she set the table, baby Thomas cooing contentedly in his basket. This was what happiness looked like, Clara realized. Not the grand gestures of novels and poetry, but the quiet satisfaction of ordinary moments shared with people who mattered. the security of knowing she was valued, not for what she could provide, but for who she was. The deep contentment that came from building something lasting with someone who loved her completely. Later that evening, as she and Silas sat on their front porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Montana sky, Clara thought about the letter she'd received that morning from the ladies' auxiliary in Silver Creek. They were planning a charity drive for new immigrants arriving in the territory, and they wanted her guidance based on her own experiences. "They want me to help other women who arrive with nothing," she told Silas. "Women like I was when I stepped off that train." "What did you tell them?" "That I'd be honored to help, that everyone deserves a chance to start over, to find their place in the world." Silas smiled, unsurprised by her answer. It was just like Clara to want to use her experience to help others, to transform her own struggles into something that could benefit those who came after her. "You'll be good at it," he said. "You understand what it's like to feel lost and unwanted. You'll know how to make them feel welcome." As they prepared for bed that night, Clara caught sight of herself in the mirror that had once reflected a frightened woman in a threadbare dress. Now she saw someone confident and content, a woman who knew her worth and her place in the world. The transformation was complete, but it had been gradual, built through daily acts of love and acceptance, through the accumulation of moments when she'd chosen hope over fear. She touched the 3 rings on her finger one final time before removing them for the night, thinking of the love stories they represented and the new chapter she and Silas were writing together. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, but they would face them as partners, in the truest sense bound not just by legal documents, but by the kind of deep, abiding love that grew stronger with each passing day. The mail-order bride, who'd arrived in rags, had found her worth, and in finding it, had discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in gold or land or fine clothes, but in the hearts of people who chose to love you exactly as you are. Outside her window, the Montana night stretched vast and peaceful, full of promise for all the tomorrows yet to come.